The coastal wind didn't just blow, it battered the glass of the living room windows like a physical weight, rattling the aluminum frames in their casings. I lay rigid on the narrow leather sofa, staring up at the vaulted ceiling. The temperature in the downstairs living room had dropped 10 degrees in the last hour. My phone sat on the coffee table, the screen dark. The final text from my now ex-girlfriend, Chloe, was still burned into my short-term memory. "I'm staying in the city. We're done, Jackson. Leave the boxes at my mom's." I had driven 2 hours to the coast to deliver her belongings, outrunning a freak atmospheric river. By the time I carried the last box inside, the Pacific Coast Highway was flooded. Chloe never showed. Instead, her mother, Madeline, had opened the door, offered me a towel, and pointed to the couch when the emergency broadcast blared over the radio, advising against all travel. A sharp draft cut through the thin cotton blanket I had pulled over my chest. I folded my arms tighter, listening to the rhythmic, heavy thud of the ocean striking the cliffside below the property. Then, the soft creak of weight on hardwood broke through the noise of the storm. I turned my head. Madeline stood halfway down the staircase. The ambient light from the hall sconce cast long shadows behind her. She had one hand resting lightly on the wooden railing. She wore a champagne-colored silk slip dress that caught the dim light, ending just below her knees. Her blonde hair fell in natural, unstyled curls around her shoulders. I sat up, pushing the blanket aside, suddenly conscious of my wrinkled dark t-shirt and the fact that I was an abandoned 26-year-old taking up space in a 39-year-old woman's home. "You're awake," she said. Her voice was low, carrying a quiet, practical authority that immediately cut through the white noise of the rain. "The wind," I said, keeping my tone flat, professional. "It's loud down here. I didn't mean to wake you." Madeline descended one more step. She didn't look at me with pity, which I expected, or annoyance, which I felt I deserved. She just looked at the frost forming at the edges of the bay windows. "The downstairs heating zone failed an hour ago," she stated, looking back down at me. My girlfriend's mom saw me sleeping on the couch and said, "Come upstairs. It's cold." I hesitated, my boots sitting empty on the rug. "I'm fine here, Madeline. I can just—" "Jackson," she interrupted, not raising her voice. "The guest room has an independent thermostat. You are shivering. Bring your blanket." She turned and walked back up the stairs. I didn't argue. I grabbed my phone, folded the blanket with strict corners, and followed her up the steps, the hardwood cold against my socks. The guest room was small, smelling faintly of kiln dust and lavender. Madeline stood by the doorway adjusting the dial on the wall. The hum of baseboard heat kicked on instantly. "Thank you," I said, dropping the blanket onto the mattress. "Don't thank me for basic shelter," she said. She crossed her arms, her posture guarded but not unkind. "Chloe has a habit of leaving messes for other people to clean up. I'm sorry you were the collateral damage tonight." She didn't offer a long, emotional apology for her daughter. She offered a fact. I respected that. "I'll be gone as soon as the road's clear," I told her. Madeline nodded once, her gaze dropping to my hands, which were still clenched at my sides. "Get some sleep, Jackson." She pulled the door shut with a quiet click. The next morning the storm had not broken. If anything, the sky was a bruised, heavy purple. I woke up at 6, made the bed with military precision, and walked downstairs. The temperature in the living room was still brutal. I found Madeline in the kitchen, a mug of black coffee in her hands. She wore heavy denim and a thick wool sweater, staring out the back sliding doors toward the ocean. Beyond the glass, a massive wooden deck extended over the slope. "Roads are washed out," she said without turning around. "Highway patrol says 48 hours minimum before they can clear the mudslides." "I can pay you for the food," I said instinctively, my unworthiness complex flaring. I was a guest who had overstayed his welcome by 12 hours. Madeline finally turned, her brow furrowed. "Keep your money in your wallet. Drink some coffee." She gestured to the French press on the counter. I poured a cup, black. I walked over to the glass to look at the deck. That's when I saw it. The main load-bearing sheer wall beneath the sunroom extension wasn't just weathering the storm, it was failing. I set my mug down on the granite counter with a sharp clink. I stepped closer to the glass. The angle of the deck joists was wrong. There was a visible 3-degree deflection in the primary support beam, and the galvanized steel ties connecting the ledger board to the house foundation were pulling away from the masonry. "How long has that deck been sagging?" I asked, my voice dropping into the clipped, rapid cadence I used on job sites. Madeline looked at me, surprised by the sudden shift in my tone. "A few months. The landlord of this plot, a management company in the city, sent a contractor out in October. He said it was just seasonal settling." "He lied," I said. I pulled my phone from my pocket, opening the flashlight app. I unlatched the sliding door. "Jackson, what are you doing? It's pouring." I stepped out into the freezing rain. The wind hit me like a shovel, but I dropped to one knee on the slick redwood decking, shining the light down into the gap between the house and the joists. The hydrostatic pressure from the saturated soil was pushing the concrete footings outward. The sheer value of the bolts was compromised. If the wind shifted southeast and caught the underbelly of the deck, the uplift force would tear the entire sunroom off the back of the house. I stood up, soaked in under 30 seconds, and stepped back inside, forcing the heavy glass door shut and locking it. "Do not go out there again," I said, wiping rain from my forehead with the back of my hand. Madeline set her mug down. "Explain." "I'm a structural engineer," I said, pulling my damp shirt away from my skin. "Your ledger board is failing. The bolts are shearing. If the wind gusts hit 60 miles an hour, that deck takes the sunroom with it, and it exposes the main structural envelope of your house to the storm." Her face tightened. She didn't panic. She didn't gasp. She walked to the kitchen island and picked up a manila envelope. "The property management company sent this yesterday. It's a notice of lease violation. They claim my ceramics kilns in the garage are causing foundation damage, and they're threatening eviction if I don't pay for a full structural retrofit by the end of the month." I took the paper from her. I read the clauses fast, my eyes scanning the legal jargon. It was a classic squeeze. They were blaming her equipment for their failing retaining wall to force her out and likely flip the coastal property. "Your kilns didn't cause this," I said, dropping the paper onto the counter. "Poor drainage and substandard galvanized ties caused this. They're trying to make you pay for their negligence." "I can't afford a retrofit, Jackson, and I can't move my studio." Her voice was steady, but I noticed her hand gripping the edge of the marble counter until her knuckles turned white. I looked at the sagging deck, then at the eviction notice, and finally at Madeline. The world had told me for 26 years that my only value was what I could build or fix. For the first time, I didn't feel the resentment of that burden. I felt the absolute clarity of a target. "You don't need a retrofit," I said, walking toward the utility closet I had spotted near the garage door. "You need emergency shoring, and you need it documented by a licensed engineer to invalidate their eviction notice." "Jackson," she started, following me, "I am not hiring you. I don't have the budget for a firm." I opened the closet, finding a heavy-duty tarp, some nylon ratchet straps, and a toolbox. "I'm not a firm. I'm a guy stuck in your house, and right now we need to stabilize that lateral load before the next pressure front hits." I spent the next 4 hours in the freezing rain. Madeline tried to stop me twice, citing the cold, but when she realized I wasn't going to stop, she shifted tactics. She didn't hover. She brought out heavy, marine-grade rope she used for hanging large ceramic pieces. She stood in the doorway, feeding me slack while I crawled through the mud beneath the deck. I located the primary stress points. Using the ratchet straps and the marine rope, I created a temporary tensioned cross brace, anchoring the failing joists to the deep-set concrete pilings of the garage foundation. It wasn't pretty, but it redistributed the lateral load path. When I finally pulled myself back into the kitchen, I was covered in mud, my hands numb, my boots leaving thick tracks on the tile. Madeline didn't say a word about the mess. She had a thick stack of dry towels waiting on a kitchen chair. She handed me one. "Bathroom is the first door on the left upstairs. Hot water. Go." I took the towel. Our fingers brushed, cold mud against warm skin. I pulled my hand back immediately, compartmentalizing the sudden spike of awareness. "The cross brace will hold up to 70 miles an hour, I reported, my teeth chattering slightly. "But we need steel." "Go shower," she ordered softly. Over the next 3 days, the highway remained closed. The forced proximity settled into a rhythm defined by the storm outside and the quiet industry inside. We didn't talk about Chloe. We talked about load-bearing walls, play-firing temperatures, and the mechanics of the property management's legal threats. I claimed a corner of her large dining table, spreading out grid paper, my laptop, and a set of architectural scales I had in my truck. I began drafting the exact specifications of the deck's failure, pulling municipal weather data and soil reports to build an airtight engineering assessment that proved the landlord's negligence. Madeline worked in the adjacent living room, dragging a small portable drafting table near the fireplace. She was reclaiming her space. She refused to let the eviction notice halt her upcoming gallery showing. I watched her sketch large, organic ceramic forms. Her focus was absolute. She chewed on the end of her graphite pencil when a curve wasn't right. I cataloged that detail, filing it away, then forced my eyes back to my load calculations. The tension between us wasn't built on proximity, it was built on restraint. I was highly aware of her every time she walked past my chair to refill her coffee. I kept my hands flat on my blueprints. I didn't want to crowd her. I didn't want to be another man demanding something from her. On the fourth night, I was still awake at 2 a.m. The house was quiet, save for the wind. I was reviewing the tensile strength limits of the existing bolts. Footsteps sounded on the stairs. Madeline walked into the dining area. She was wearing a thick robe over her clothes, carrying a glass of water. She stopped, looking at the papers scattered across my desk. "You're still working," she observed. "I need the shear values perfect," I said, not looking up, tapping my mechanical pencil against the desk. "If I miss a decimal, their corporate lawyer will throw the assessment out." She walked over, stopping right beside my chair. I could smell the lavender soap from her skin. I stopped tapping the pencil. I kept my breathing even, staring at the grid paper. "You're exhausting yourself, Jackson," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm fine." She reached down and placed her hand flat over my blueprint, covering the numbers. I finally looked up. Her eyes were exhausted, lined with the stress of the impending eviction, but they were incredibly clear. "Stop," she said. "Just for tonight. Stop." It wasn't a request. It was an intervention. She was offering me permission to take off the armor of my competence. I looked at her hand on the paper. I almost reached out to cover it with mine. Instead, I carefully set my pencil down, closed the laptop, and stood up, stepping back to give her space. "Okay," I said quietly. "I'm done for the night." She offered a small, tired smile, removing her hand. "Thank you." The midpoint of the week brought a break in the rain, but it brought something worse. On Thursday afternoon, while I was out in the driveway pulling tools from my truck, a white city vehicle pulled up to the security gate. A man in a high-vis vest and a hard hat stepped out, holding a clipboard. Marcus, a city inspector I recognized from a downtown commercial project a year ago. He didn't wait for Madeline. He walked straight past the gate, assessing the side of the house. "Hart," Marcus said, spotting me. "What are you doing out here? Thought you only worked commercial." "A favor," I said, stepping between him and the pathway to the backyard. "What's the city doing here, Marcus?" "Management company called in a hazard report," he said, tapping his pen against the clipboard. Claimed the tenant compromised the foundation with unpermitted heavy machinery. I'm here to tag the structure. Red tag. Uninhabitable. Madeline stepped out of the front door wearing her clay-stained apron. She froze when she heard the words, red tag. If he red tagged the house, she had to vacate immediately. Her studio, her kilns, her gallery pieces, gone. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't posture. I walked directly up to Marcus. You aren't tagging this house, I said, my tone flat, stripped of any negotiation. Not your call, Jackson. The visual deflection on the rear elevation is entirely contained within the secondary deck ledger, I interrupted, quoting the municipal code from memory. The primary structural envelope of the main residence remains uncompromised. I have the tensioned cross brace stabilizing the lateral load, and my stamped engineering assessment is currently sitting on my desk proving the soil hydrostatic pressure caused the failure, not the tenant's equipment. Marcus frowned, looking at my mud-stained boots, then at Madeline, then back to me. You're signing off on that shoring? With your own stamp? I am the engineer on record as of Tuesday, I lied smoothly. You red tag this house without reviewing my submitted structural report, and I will personally file an injunction against the city for procedural violation, and I will copy the state licensing board on the soil negligence of the property owner. Silence hung in the damp air. Marcus knew my reputation. He knew I didn't bluff about structural math. He sighed, lowering the clipboard. Fine. You have 48 hours to submit the permanent repair plan to the permit office. If the steel isn't ordered by Monday, I'm coming back with the red tag. He turned and walked back to his truck. I stood in the driveway watching the taillights disappear. When I turned around, Madeline was staring at me. Her hands were shaking slightly against the fabric of her apron. You just staked your engineering license on my deck, she said, her voice tight. It's just math, Madeline. The math is solid. She shook her head, turning away quickly and walking back inside. I followed her into the kitchen. She was standing by the sink, gripping the edge of the porcelain, her back to me. I can't let you do that, she said to the window. If they fight you, if the city rejects your plan, you get flagged. You lose your commercial contracts. You're 26, Jackson. You don't sink your career for a woman you barely know just because her daughter treated you like garbage. The wound in my chest tightened, but I didn't retreat. I walked to the center of the kitchen and stopped. This has nothing to do with Chloe, I said, my voice quiet, forcing her to listen to the cadence. And it has nothing to do with me needing to be a martyr. I looked at the structure. I saw the failure. I know how to fix it. I paused, letting the silence stretch. You built a life in this house. You work harder than anyone I've ever seen. I'm not going to let a corrupt management company steal it from you because they think you don't have the leverage to fight back. I am the leverage. She finally turned around. A single tear tracked down her cheek, cutting through a smudge of dry clay. She didn't wipe it away. She took a breath, letting go of the sink. She took one step toward me, then stopped, maintaining the boundary. You really think the city will accept the plan? I know they will, I said, holding her gaze, keeping my hands at my sides. I just need to install the steel brackets before the Monday inspection. The climax of the storm hit on Saturday night. The roads had opened briefly that morning, allowing me to drive my truck to an industrial supply yard in the city and purchase the heavy-gauge steel brackets, concrete anchors, and a hammer drill using my own business credit card. By 8 p.m., the wind was howling at 70 miles an hour. The power grid failed. The house plunged into darkness, lit only by the emergency battery lanterns Madeline had placed on the counters. I was in the garage, pulling the heavy brackets from my truck bed. Madeline stood in the interior doorway, holding a high-lumen flashlight. You can't do this tonight, she said over the roar of the wind hitting the garage door. It's too dangerous outside. "The temporary brace won't hold against this wind shear," I said, loading the hammer drill with a masonry bit. "The soil is completely saturated. If I don't set the steel anchors into the concrete foundation tonight, the deck goes, and it takes the exterior wall with it." I didn't wait for her permission. I grabbed the gear and went out the side door into the freezing maelstrom. The cold was a physical assault. The rain felt like needles against my face. I crawled under the deck, the mud thick and freezing against my jeans. I positioned the first heavy steel bracket against the concrete piling. I engaged the hammer drill. The noise was deafening, the vibration rattling my teeth as the bit bit into the old concrete. It took 2 hours. 2 hours of brutal, muscle-tearing labor in the dark, fighting the wind, fighting the cold, drilling, setting the heavy expansion anchors, and torquing the bolts until my shoulders burned and my hands bled from scraping against the rough concrete. When I finally torqued the last bolt on the primary ledger board, the entire structure groaned, then settled. The lateral sway stopped. The steel had caught the load. The house was locked to the earth. I crawled out from under the deck, entirely spent. I couldn't feel my fingers. I dragged the drill behind me, walking toward the sliding glass door. Madeline was waiting. She threw the door open before I even reached the handle. She didn't speak. She grabbed my arm, pulling me inside out of the wind, and slammed the heavy glass shut, locking out the storm. She stripped the heavy, soaked canvas jacket off my shoulders. She tossed it onto the tile. "Sit," she ordered, pointing to the hearth of the fireplace where she had managed to get a heavy log fire roaring. I collapsed onto the brick hearth, staring at the flames, my chest heaving. I was shivering violently now, the adrenaline crashing. Madeline disappeared into the bathroom and returned a minute later with a basin of warm water and a clean towel. She knelt on the floor in front of me. She took my bruised, bleeding hands in hers. I tried to pull back. "I'm filthy. I'll ruin the rug." "Stop moving," she commanded gently. She dipped the cloth into the warm water and began carefully cleaning the mud and blood from my knuckles, the heat of the water and the deliberate, gentle pressure of her hands acting as a grounding wire. The violent trembling in my shoulders began to subside. I watched the top of her head, the way the firelight caught the gold in her hair. The chaotic noise of the storm outside vanished. In that small space in front of the fire, there was only the sudden, absolute stillness of her care. "The house is secure," I managed to say, my voice raspy. She paused, holding my clean left hand between both of hers. She looked up. Her eyes were dark, serious, and stripped of all pretense. "I know," she said quietly. "You kept us safe." She didn't lean in. She didn't cross the line. But the way she held my hand, firmly, anchoring me to the present, was the heaviest, most certain touch I had ever felt. It wasn't an exploration. It was a destination. Monday morning brought clear skies and a brutal, blinding coastal sun. Marcus arrived at 9 a.m. sharp. He walked to the back of the house, his clipboard in hand. I stood on the deck wearing clean clothes, holding a thermos of coffee. Madeline stood next to me. Marcus inspected the steel brackets, testing the torque on the bolts, checking the shear lines. He spent 20 minutes walking the perimeter. Finally, he walked up the stairs to the deck and faced us. "It's over-engineered," Marcus muttered, looking at me. "You used half-inch steel on a residential deck." "I build things to last, Marcus," I said evenly. Marcus sighed, pulling a green tag from his pocket and signing his name across it. He handed it to Madeline. "City signs off. The structure is sound. You're clear." He tipped his hard hat and walked away. Madeline stared at the green tag in her hand. The eviction threat was dead. The landlord had no leverage. Her studio, her home, her life. It was hers again. I began gathering my tools into my canvas bag. The job was done. My excuse for being here was gone. "I'll pack my truck," I said, zipping the bag. I left the complete engineering report on the dining table. "Make sure you email a PDF to the management company so they know the legal liability is entirely on them now." I started walking toward the sliding door. "Jackson." I stopped. I turned around. Madeline walked across the deck. She didn't stop at arm's length this time. She stepped directly into my space. She reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a small, heavy object. She held it out to me. It was a key, a newly cut brass key on a simple ring. "I have a gallery opening in the city next Friday," she said, her voice steady, refusing to look away from my eyes. "I need someone to help me configure the display pedestals. The weight distribution has to be precise." I looked at the key in her palm. It wasn't just a request for labor. It was a boundary line being erased. It was a public choice. "You're hiring me?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "No," Madeline said softly. "I'm asking my partner to stand beside me." I reached out and took the key. The metal was warm from her pocket. I closed my fist around it, feeling the rigid edges pressing into my palm, locking the reality into place. I didn't need to make a speech. I just nodded once. "I'll be there," I said. She exhaled, a long, shaky breath, and the last of the tension left her shoulders. She stepped forward, resting her forehead against my chest, right over my collarbone. I didn't hesitate. I wrapped my arms around her, burying my face in her hair, breathing in the scent of lavender and rain. The world stopped spinning. The wandering was over. Looking back now, I realize that true love isn't about grand, dramatic rescues. It's about consistency, respect, and showing up to do the hard work when the storm hits. It's about knowing you don't have to shrink yourself to fit into someone else's life. Please like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this.